China's diplomatic role in the Middle East under sharp focus as foreign ministers from Beijing and Tehran meet. It's calling on the U.S. and Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and for a comprehensive ceasefire. So, can China help in the war? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. China is emerging as a major player in global diplomacy, including in the Middle East. In 2023, it helped reestablish diplomatic ties between Riyadh and Tehran. While it's not officially mediating efforts to end the ongoing war, both the U.S. and Iran are looking to China to help de-escalate. So, can it propel the two sides towards that goal? And if China makes a direct push to stop the fighting, how will its economic clout affect the course of negotiations? We'll discuss these issues with our guests in just a bit. But first, this report by Ferdia Carr.
In his first visit to Beijing since the war began, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi hailed ties with strategic partner China. He also applauded its push for peace, including a proposal by President Xi Jinping put forward last month.
We are aware of the four-point proposal put forward by the Honourable President Xi. We believe the four principles he proposed are entirely correct. Based on these principles, it is possible to achieve peace and stability in the Gulf region. We have always believed, and even more now, that China can play a constructive role in this regard.
Beijing's four-point plan for Middle East peace asks countries in the region to commit to peaceful coexistence, to national sovereignty, the principle of international law, and a balanced approach to development and security. The plan aims to establish peace between Iran and Gulf countries that have come under attack during the war. It doesn't address US-Iran talks directly, but shows China is willing to be a mediator in Middle East affairs, as it did in 2023 when it helped restore diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China has called the US and Israel's war against Iran illegitimate, but it's also been critical of Tehran's decision to block the Strait of Hormuz, a critical energy transit route. Beijing has called for it to be fully reopened.
China supports Iran in safeguarding its national sovereignty and security and commends Iran's willingness to seek a political settlement through diplomatic channels. Regarding the issue of the Hormuz Strait, the international community shares common concerns about restoring normal and safe passage across the strait.
With US President Donald Trump scheduled to visit Beijing next week, attention has turned to China's potential role in de-escalating the conflict. Ahead of the trip, the U.S. asked its rival China to help fully reopen the strait.
I would argue and have argued that it is in their interest for that resolution to pass and for pressure to be brought on Iran, because it is in their interest not to see international waterways, including the Straits of Hormuz, be closed down and cause economic chaos to dozens and dozens of countries around the world.
While China may welcome the U.S. Navy being tied down in the Gulf rather than focused on the Asia-Pacific, the conflict also threatens its economy. China is by far the largest buyer of Iranian oil. And while Washington may be unhappy with Beijing's support for Tehran, China is facing pressure from both sides to exert its considerable influence to bring the war to an end. Ferdia Carr, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. In the Iranian city of Isfahan is Setareh Sadeqi, an assistant professor at Tehran University's Faculty of World Studies. In Philadelphia is Scott Uehlinger, a retired CIA station chief and former U.S. Navy officer. And joining us from Beijing is Andy Mock, a senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us today on Inside Story. Setareh, let me start with you today. How significant from your vantage point was this visit by Abbas Araghchi to China? And what message was Iran trying to send by having him go there, not too long before U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to be in Beijing to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping?
As you mentioned, the timing is very important and it intends to signal a very important message. I think while Iran respects China's efforts to probably broker a peace deal between the United States and Iran, Iran also wants to send a message that it will abide by its commitment to protect its national sovereignty and using its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz as a means of protecting its territorial waters, as well as using it as a bargaining chip against U.S. sanctions. The visit also comes after China signaled that it wants to build a structure against U.S. sanctions, and it is going to punish companies that comply by U.S. Sanctions and make it difficult for China to have normal trades with other countries, including Iran. So I think the two countries are sending a message that they will continue to act as sovereign nations and will not allow to be bullied by the United States and coerced into taking measures that contradict or jeopardize their national interests.
Scott, from the outside looking in, it seems as though the U.S. is putting a lot of emphasis on China's potential role going forward in this role. Is that an admission that American diplomacy has failed thus far?
No, I don't think so, Mohammed. I think it's more an admission that at this point, Iran is basically a client state of China. The two are great trading partners. China is dependent on Iran's oil, and also importantly, Iran is dependent on things like Chinese chemical deliveries that allow them to build up their ballistic missile fleet, as well as arms exports to Iran, which allows Iran to basically threaten its neighbors. So the United States is pragmatically recognizing that China has a lot of influence over Iran, mostly because of the energy problem. And so I think China, in its own interest, is interested in basically resolving this conflict in a way that will best benefit China, but might also benefit the United States and the neighbors of Iran in the Middle East.
Andy, what do you make of all this? What do you make of the timing of the trip, the reason behind Araghchi's visit, and also how was the visit perceived by Chinese leadership?
Well, Mohammed, I think the timing, as we heard, was very deliberate. And this was seen, I think, on Iran's part as an inoculation against any potential move that China might take in its discussions with the United States. But I think it's also very important to look at this within the broader global context, where I think it's widely recognized in China and perhaps other parts of the world that the torch of global leadership is passing from the United States to China. And this has very, very profound implications because the US model was based, first of all, on the belief that the universal political endpoint was liberal democracies. Free markets were the engine of growth, and security was provided by the US military. And we can see with China's peace plan regarding the Iranian conflict is that the Chinese model is actually very, very different. So first of all, there's an acceptance for pluralistic political systems. There's a belief that development is really the basis of security, and that infrastructure over ideology. And I think, this kind of makes people's brains explode sometimes, that they can't understand that China doesn't want to replace the US, but in fact has a very, very different approach that I think resonates with many countries around the world, including Iran.
Scott, I can see you reacting to what Andy was saying there. It looked to me like you wanted to jump in, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to do so.
Right. Well, I think what my colleague is stating is perhaps a little overboard. Right now, I think politically, Chairman Xi wants to present, certainly it's in his interests to broker such a deal. Because for one thing, Xi is relatively embattled right now. He has very declining popularity within China. There's been a huge a huge departure of foreign business out of China as he becomes increasingly authoritarian, and not to mention the fact that he's had massive purges within the Chinese military and the Chinese Communist Party that is demoralizing a lot of people. So China needs a win right now. And so they're definitely going to the benefit of the United States in this case, and the benefit of Iran, negotiate or try their best to use their influence on Iran to pressure them to come to an agreement. But this is because really at this point, China needs a win because it is losing the PR battle in Southeast Asia with a lot of important countries such as the Philippines and Japan signing new defense agreements, Indonesia signing a defense agreement with the United States, because these countries are alarmed at Chinese expansionism.
Setareh, China remains Tehran's most important economic lifeline. We're talking, this is after years of U.S. sanctions that have left Iran deeply dependent on Chinese trade, Chinese investment. What does Iran want to see from China going forward?
I think Iran and China both have been victims of U.S. sanctions, and they're both seeking to develop a new structure where they can continue to act as sovereign nations and protect their economies against U.S. hostile measures. Iran and China previously worked on establishing workarounds in order to facilitate the export of Iran's oil to China by establishing and building a railroad through Central Asia. And part of Iran's oil passes through that. And they also have been working through the Strait of Hormuz. Chinese ships can continue passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And they are also seeking to challenge U.S. dollar and the dominance of U.S. dollar over global energy markets. And we're seeing that Iran and China are proposing that ships have to pay or buy oil in yuan rather than U.S. dollar. And this is a major attack on U.S. petrodollar, which is one of the founding pillars of U.S. hegemony and imperialism in the region. This comes as perceived as a threat, and that is why the United States is approaching China. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the United States is approaching China in order to sort of prevent that from happening. But as I said, I think China and Iran both find shared, especially economic, but also strategic interest in working together to deter U.S. hegemonic ambitions in the region, which basically treats other countries as client states, and they want to, work together as equal partners, protecting their own national interests rather than the interest of a hegemon that has practiced bullying other countries into surrender.
Andy, how much has China been impacted by the disruption of energy flowing from the Gulf to Asia? And how important is it to China that Iran is not further weakened by this war?
Well, Mohammed, I think, first of all, there is a misperception, I think, in Western reports about China's vulnerability to an energy shock. And, I think the truth is the U.S. is far more vulnerable. And here's why. We hear about how China is so dependent on Iranian oil, but that really neglects the bigger picture that China's total energy mix is something like 58% domestic coal. A significant proportion of it is renewables, solar, hydro, nuclear. So there is a portion that is dependent on oil, and that is actually a declining percentage as well. And China has an enormous strategic petroleum reserve. But I think more importantly, its political system allows it to insulate companies and individuals from any significant price increases. However, I think the U.S., despite being a major, perhaps the largest oil producer in the world, has a very direct pain transmission mechanism from the global price of oil. So even though the U.S. can produce a lot of oil, it's priced globally. That this is a very direct pain transmission mechanism to the gas pump. And with the midterm elections coming up, I think this is why we see the increasing anxiety, I would say even desperation from the Trump administration to reach some sort of off-ramp with Iran. And I think, again, as our colleague mentioned, I think Iran, through its exercising control over the Strait of Hormuz, which previously was only a theoretical issue, is now shown to be very, very real. And I think that puts the United States in a very, very awkward situation.
Scott, as we mentioned before, Donald Trump is scheduled to visit China and meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on May 14th and May 15th. From your vantage point, what is the state of the relationship between the U.S. and China right now, and how much have tensions risen between both countries as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I don't, generally speaking, relations have been, I'd say, somewhat declining over the past perhaps 8 years or so. But that's basically based upon the realism that China is basically creating some of the world's problems, whereas before the United States had given China a blank check. That said, President Trump, I think, is diplomatic with his dealings with Xi. However, the United States is aware of the fact that China is acting in some ways that is alarming to its neighbors. And so the United States has been sought out by several Southeast Asian countries. As I said, Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, even Australia, and Vietnam. A number of countries are alarmed at the rise of China. And so President Trump is basically dealing with China as the primary rival of the United States. Although he wants to keep, obviously, good relations between the two, he wants to ensure that China's expansionist tendencies are kept in check by a series of alliances in Southeast Asia, and even such things as a recent agreement about the Straits of Malacca with Indonesia.
Setareh, I was just asking Scott about the nature of the relationship right now between the U.S. and China. I want to ask you about the importance of the relationship between Iran and China. How influential is China right now when it comes to Iran? How much pressure could China exert on Iran? I mean, would China be able to play an oversized role in perhaps getting Iran to accept a deal or a framework for a deal with the U.S.?
Well, I think Iran's message has been very clear before the war started, during the war, and right now during this very fragile so-called ceasefire, that it will not capitulate and it will not surrender to the United States or to possible pressures from China. I do not think that China is seeking to exert pressure on Iran. It will try to broker some sort of a peace deal or an offer Trump an off-ramp from the quagmire that the United States fills stock in. But Iran will continue to show that its sovereignty is very important to it. Iran's proposal for negotiations to the United States has been very clear that we will consider certain issues, including, for example, the nuclear program, as our sovereign issues, and they're not negotiable. And Iran has also made it clear that it will not negotiate with the United States or any other countries, for that matter, at gunpoint. It will negotiate as an equal partner. China and Iran have been dealing with each other and trading as equal partners rather than one imposing their ambitions and agendas on the other one. And this is something that is very difficult to understand for the United States. And that's why we're seeing projection, propaganda, calling other countries as client states or expansionists, when in fact the expansionist country and the one that treats other countries, especially the Persian Gulf countries, as client states is the United States. The United States does not even know how to practice diplomacy, because you cannot say that you're talking to another nation and then bomb them exactly in the middle of the negotiations. What the United States did to Iran 2 times before, when the two countries were talking about the nuclear issue. Even when Pakistan tried to broker a peace deal between the two countries and Iran agreed to lift the restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, the United States continued its blockade over over Iran's territorial water, and that is why we are seeing where we are in this illegal aggression on Iran. So I think Iran and China will continue to act as sovereign nations. I mean, Iran previously, whenever there has been a disagreement with China, they have voiced it and they have talked to it like two adults countries, and they have tried to reach a settlement over points that they did not totally agree on. Whereas the model that the United States is practicing is still an imperialist model, trying to coerce other nations, talking about peace at one point and then saying that they want to bomb an entire nation back to Stone Age or back to, or totally destroy an entire civilization. So the rhetoric coming from White House and especially Trump does not signal willingness to practice diplomacy. It's all about coercion, and that's exactly what China and Iran are determined to repel.
Scott, I'm gonna get back to you with a question in just a minute. I want to go to Andy first, specifically about some comments from U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He has openly and publicly urged China to use its influence with Iran to help de-escalate the crisis. From the vantage point of Chinese officials, is this an acknowledgement that the U.S., by the U.S. rather, that Beijing perhaps has the upper hand here?
No, I think it certainly can be seen that way, Mohammed. And I think, again, I think if we look at the China-U.S. relationship over the last few years, I actually think it has turned a corner and is on a trend of greater improvement for this simple reason. We look at what happened on Liberation Day. Every other country succumbed or knuckled under to these American tariff threats. And the only country to not do so was China. And I think it even responded with, its own trump card, as it were, with rare earth metals. And I think, that earned the respect of the United States. And this is, I think, why we can see, again, this more diplomatic approach. Because I think what is very clear is, Trump's approach, as our Iranian colleague said, more of a big stick, threatening countries. And I think the question from China is this an aberration, or is this just a continuation or even, the culmination of an American framework, worldview, style of diplomacy? And I think, we have to see, but certainly, I think from the Chinese perspective, it has shown that it can't be intimidated. And September 3rd last year, I think, was a very important date with the military parade, because what President Xi at that time said that was not widely reported in Western media is that China is a peaceful nation, but it is not afraid of violence. And I think that, coupled with its economic and trade response, I think sent a very, very clear message to the United States.
Scott, I know you wanted to jump in. Before you do, I just want to ask you a question, because you heard Setareh there talk about the mixed messaging that has come from the U.S., in the past month. You've had some days where it's coercion. You've had some days where it's a more diplomatic approach. There have been so many different messages coming from the U.S., from President Trump, from other U.S. officials. From your perspective, is the Trump administration actually genuinely seeking an off-ramp from escalation? And to what lengths at this stage will it go to end the war? I mean, Trump is under a lot of pressure internally, domestic politics in the U.S., midterm elections, unpopularity of the war. Does Trump actually want to end this?
Well, I think he certainly does, and I might disagree with some of your statements about the unpopularity of the war. I think Americans understand that basically Iran has been at war with the United States since 1979, as well as the rest of the world. If you ask any of the 9 countries surrounding Iran that were attacked by Iran in the past 2 months, including the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, even Azerbaijan, they agree that this present Iranian regime is a threat, not only to its neighbors, but also to the people of Iran. let's not forget to mention the 40,000 Iranian demonstrators that were eliminated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in the last 3 months. Okay, so this regime does not speak for the Iranian people. It is a regime that has been dedicated to terrorism since it was born in 1979.
Scott, let me ask you very quickly as well, because we are starting to run out of time. Is there any concern in Washington right now that Iran and China could be brought closer together because of all of this pressure?
I don't think that is a primary concern. I think the United States, like I said, welcomes the idea of Chinese pressure on Iran to come to some sort of a settlement. But at the same time, the United States will be aware that China also has an agenda here, but perhaps there may be a solution that is palatable to all sides.
Setareh, we only have about a minute and a half left. It looked like you wanted to jump in. I'll let you go ahead. But I also just wanted to ask you, how important is it now for Tehran to get clarity over how far China is willing to support Iran if it agrees to ease tensions in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I think for our colleague in the U.S. who has worked for CIA, it's amazing to hear that he thinks that the aggression between the United States and Iran started by the United States. If he should remember that in 1953, it was the CIA that overthrown the democratically elected government of Mossadegh. CIA and Mossad worked during the Bush administration in Nevada to arm and train MEK terrorists in order to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists. And the United States has also killed Iranians through sanctions. The United States is currently killing more than 500,000 people across the world with its sanctions. The war on Iran, the illegal war on Iran, started by killing 170 little girls while they were in school in session. And you were talking about inflated numbers totally made up by fashion bloggers and people who have never been in Iran and accusing Iran of fake numbers of killed so-called protesters when your government bragged about having armed them, having supported these so-called protesters who have actually killed a lot of security forces. And you did so because you wanted to justify this illegal war on Iranians. I think Iran will work with China in order to protect its sovereignty, but Iran will not rely on any foreign nations, including China, in order to protect its sovereignty. And they have made it clear that it will continue independently to protect its border, and they have done so very successfully.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there as we have run out of time. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Setareh Sadeqi, Scott Uehlinger, and Andy Mock. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment. Stay tuned.